We are activating your unique self-discovery one show at a time. The Orchard of Wisdom Self-Discovery podcasts are at your fingertips, just waiting to inspire and invite you in discovering just how awesome you really are and how to navigate through life in joy, enrichment, personal abundance, in mind, body, spirit, heart, and soul. All the people we bring you are here to serve you on your journey of life. Do enjoy our next show. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of Mental Health Awareness right here on selfdiscoverymedia.com. I am your host, Sarah Troy, and my guest today is Denise Beck-Clark. 30 Years Hence is her book, where she talks about 30 years hence and the Holocaust. She points out that, like in the 70s, it wasn't too long ago that the Holocaust happened, and many of the people just kind of carried on with their lives as if to kind of get on with things and leave it all in the past. But can you leave something that horrific in the past? Denise is a psychotherapist-turned-novelist, and with New York as a backdrop, she decided to bring a beautiful experience and unpredictable characters and plot twists to interest and fascinate the devil-may-care, anything-goes culture of the era. 30 Years Hence is about dealing with pain and suffering caused by the war specifically and the so-called human condition generally. The humans that have consciousness and the capacity to think is both the good and the bad news. The point of the view presented in the book ascribes to both Buddhism, cognitive therapy, and in a summary statement might be find and be grateful for whatever is good in your life, because as bad as it may seem, your life could always be worse. Very good, wise words. This is hopefully what the readers of 30 Years Hence will apply to their own lives if they need to. Those are beautiful words. You know, we have become a society that is very, very much focusing on lack and restrictions and what we can't have. And we have not got into the gratitude and appreciation of what we do have. And we have a great deal. And when you talk about the Holocaust and you've written this story around that, we're very much reminded of the war in the Ukraine and all the other suffering that's happening around the world, and why people are going around with me rights and me freedoms, you know, to have a gun or not to vaccinate or to do this or to do that. It is, they don't really know real suffering and the long-term effects of that suffering. And I think we really have a society today that is all kind of suffering from some sort of post-traumatic stress disorder. So welcome to the show, love.
Thank you.
So, where do we start? There is so much to unravel here. I'd like to get to the book in a moment, but just as a psychotherapist, and those beautiful words that you said is that, you know, when we look at what we think we don't have, there's always somebody that's got it a great deal worse. How do we get people to look at that mindset again and learn to step into a gratitude? You know, take a breath and stop buying into the hurricane of what you don't have and really appreciate what we do have.
Well, you know, I think that part of what led me to write 30 Years Hence is that when I was working with a very seriously mentally ill population, psychotic for the most part, as well as very poor and, you know, really with very few resources. And I became, at some point, I became very interested in the fact that people did survive the Holocaust. And I read many of the survivors' memoirs and accounts of how they lived through it. And it was just mind-boggling to me. And but basically what it said to me was that if people could live through this and adjust their attitude, so to speak, for this, then pretty much what people are going through now is, you know, child's play in comparison. You know, I mean, you don't really, we all have a sense of what happened during World War II, and especially in the camps and with the Nazis and all of that. But until you read the accounts of people who were actually there. I mean, each book that I read was like the first time I was reading about it, it was just so unbelievable. And that people were able to recall all these details and present them. So I just was really impressed by the fact that they could do that. So I really was interested in creating a story which would demonstrate that whole philosophy of, you know, be grateful for whatever little bit it is. I mean, in the midst of a horrific situation, you can always find some little detail here or there that is going to be good, you know, or at least something that you can interpret as good. You know, I mean, that's part of it too, is that we always have a choice of how to interpret reality, you know, and that's very much a Buddhist outlook. And in fact, cognitive therapy became really popular, I'd say about 20 years ago or so. Before 20 years ago, though, was Viktor Frankel, who, if you're familiar with his work, okay, he was I think it was German or Austrian psychiatrist, Jewish psychiatrist, who wound up in Auschwitz. And he lived, and he wrote extensively when he got out of, you know, when the war was over. And he even founded a kind of therapy called logotherapy, which preceded cognitive therapy, because logo is, you know, words, basically. And what he talked about was how what we think and what we say really affects how we feel. So he really set the, you know, the scene for that to develop. Of course, you know, it didn't really happen till actually, I guess it was more than 40 years later. But I guess I did sort of a takeoff on that in the book, in that there is a program, you know, the 70s were a time of self
discovery, self-exploration.
All of that. There were groups, there was therapies, and are you familiar with EST? There was EST back then. That was like the granddaddy of, you know, all the programs, and it was quite popular in the 70s. I think it started in the very early 70s and went into the early 80s. So again, in the book, there is a program that I have created that I know some readers find a little like unbelievable or, you know, offensive even. But I didn't mean it to be exactly realistic. It's almost like a metaphor in a way. I mean, you take things in different ways. I think people who are very literal might have a problem with it, but
that is a problem itself when you take things very literal. You know, there is always shade and shadow on everything, right? Nothing is completely black and white.
Exactly. And really what we're talking about is how relative things are. And that's what we're talking about. I mean, you can interpret something as horrible, or you can interpret it as kind of bad, or kind of good, or even really good, you know, in comparison to other things.
Yes. And I think even when we acknowledge something is horrible, do you go down the horrible road, or do you try and look for some sunlight in that horrible? What are you empowered to do about it? You know, that none of us go through life without being scathed somewhere along the line. But do you become part of the trauma, the drama? Do you carry it with you? Does it become part of your DNA that you can't see the light because you're so bogged down? And I think, you know, it's that old adage, it's not happening to you, it's happening for you. You know, to discover your strength, to discover your abilities, to discover your courage. And that no matter what we're given, we have that choice to decide, am I, you know, I mean, there's the initial shock, there's the initial pain, there's the initial anguish. One has to go through that. Otherwise, it goes into our DNA. But it, you know, it gets to a point where you go, okay, all right, what can I do with this?
Well, I've been, you know, I've studied Buddhism on and off my whole life, basically. And I have gotten back into it more deeply recently. I don't believe quite all of what they say, but they, you know, they talk about how ideally you can look at problems as a gift, you know,
Yes.
and there are people who, you know, who just say that casually. I'm sure you can go into any store that sells, you know, Hallmark cards or posters or whatever, and you're going to find things that allude to that, you know, that I can't think of one of the, you know, cliches right off the bat, but that problems are really like, do us a favor, because then we have the opportunity to resolve whatever they're throwing in our, you know, step in our, at our feet.
You know, and from that, of
Resolve.
course, is you know, we do discover some abilities we didn't know we had. You know, we do discover that we have a lot more strength and courage, or we do discover we have a broader mindset and not just the narrow one that maybe we were brought up with. I think in that discovery, you know, we realize actually, I love the word flawsome. We realize how flawsome we are. You
How,
know,
what is it?
flawsome, flawed
Loss?
and awesome. Becomes
Okay.
flawsome.
Yeah.
And you know,
Awesome.
there
That's
isn't a
interesting.
human being that isn't flawed, but we can be awesome in our
Right.
flawedness, right? And
Right.
stop looking for perfection, because that's somebody else's idea. And you'll
Right.
never reach perfection because somebody will always find criticism in it. But
Right.
find that perfect path for you, that even in your flawsomeness, you really feel that you can walk, that you really want to explore. I think
Mm-hmm.
as human nature, and I think this is very much, you must see so much with your clients, that we see so many people around the doom and gloom that is being served us all the time in media and social media and just people's general conversation. And of course, the pandemic just added, you know, a
Oh,
heavy
yeah.
blanket on top of that. And then you have the economic struggles, and we have the you know, the depression that is coming out of this. And then you still got the
Yes.
people that are angry and angst. And instead of like shaking it off and going, okay, it has been, or we're, as far as the COVID is concerned, it's going to be a part of our future. That's just the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
What can I do about it? And it just feels that people are giving into the doom and gloom
Right.
instead of going, okay, there must be some possibilities or some opportunities here to do something. Do you think that
Well,
has become a mindset that is not being embraced so much because we're just weighed down?
well, yes and no. I mean, I think that a lot of people are just not used to thinking introspectively
Mm,
or, you know, analyzing things. A lot of
mm,
people just take things as they are and as they
face
come
value.
and react,
Yeah.
you know, and don't necessarily think, maybe, you know, people go to church and religious, you know, proceedings and try to get some sort of comfort or, you know, ideas of how to go on from there. But that's a whole different, you know, outlook, the whole religious outlook.
Mm,
And I kind of, I know a minute ago I was talking about Buddhism, but I separate, you know, Buddhism is not a theistic, a God related
it's more a
religion.
philosophy, isn't it?
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
largely. I
Mm,
mean, they have their own aspects of faith and,
mm.
you know, not gods, but
Energy
um,
source. Mm-hmm.
well, Buddhas. I mean,
Mm,
one thing that surprised me was that there isn't just like one Buddha. I mean, they have a whole bunch
Yeah.
of Buddhas with different names and
Yes.
everything. And they're supposedly people who actually lived, you know, a couple of thousand years ago, and that, you know, started these philosophies that came down through the ages. But they're not preaching anything having to do with God.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people do rely on God and religion. And I mean, I'm an atheist, so I'm not going to even talk about that aspect of stuff.
Well, I mean, a lot of people, oh, just give it up to God. But isn't that abstaining any responsibility yourself?
Largely, I think so.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a lot of it is.
I mean,
So,
you can ask the higher powers, whatever you believe in. One gentleman had a show with me called The World According to Gus, God, Universal Spirit. You know, whether you believe in just the energy or the higher force of energy and wisdom, which I do, but not any particular religion. I do find when we get to religions, they become very humanized and very misread. You know, if your God isn't one of love, it's not a God I would like to know about, because I think that's what Buddhism is about, is about treat others as you would treat yourself, right? It's respect and value.
Yes,
and I think that should be the fundamental in absolutely every religion and in every upbringing.
And if it were, and if people actually followed that, things would be a lot better in general. I mean, a lot of the stuff that would be happening, but people it wouldn't feel so overwhelming.
Right. We wouldn't have things like the Holocaust.
Exactly.
Yeah, because, you know, we wouldn't have got to that hate rhetoric. Now, and of course, a lot what's going on in the Ukraine right now, we're seeing genocide in such an evil way. This is, again, rather like, you know, Hitler. It is, from my point of view, it is a very small person inside who is trying to be all powerful, and they don't care who they destroy or what they destroy, as long as they have adoration, or fear is the adoration, and power.
And also, see, I see it slightly differently in that I see what's his name, Putin, as greed. It's greed on his part. You know, it's totally greed and, well, ego to some extent, but it's, you know, give me money kind of thing with him.
I mean, why do they need more and more and more?
Exactly.
You know, but what's in their thinking? You know, why is it that they have to annihilate people and annihilate things? I mean, you know, wouldn't it have been more productive to work with the Ukraine, and you would then reap more profit,
he
instead of
want
destroying?
that.
I don't understand why these people who want power destroy.
Because you know what? I don't even think it's so much that they want to destroy as they just don't care.
Right.
They don't. If the people are in the way to him, so it's like, you know, let's drop a bomb over here in this school over here and this mall over here, and that way we'll wipe out another like 100,000 people,
right?
And so there'll be less in the way of what I want to get. Hitler, of course, had his own agenda about, you know, blaming the Jews for the problems of the world, and how he wanted to just get rid of that whole group of people, you know. So it was like,
but do you think he wanted to get rid of half of himself because he was half Jewish?
I think, was he half Jewish?
I thought he was. I may be reading that wrong. Please, folks, if you're listening to this, do comment. But I thought he was Jewish, you know, had Jewish blood in him, and he hated that so much that he felt by destroying the Jews, he was destroying that part of him.
Could be. I mean, I could be wrong. I'm not Please really don't
put me right, folks.
I think I remember reading that he had like maybe a grandparent, one like he was maybe a little bit Jewish. But I didn't really read it as his destroying the Jews was so personal in terms of how he felt about himself. I think he needed a scapegoat for his own failures. You know, like he was a would-be artist, and he didn't get into the school he wanted to get into, the art school he wanted to get into, and he blamed all the Jews, you know, who were getting into the art school when he didn't. And so I think it was more of a, you know, I have to blame somebody for my own failures, so it's the Jews.
A question I have for you here is, people look at Putin, people look at Lenin, people look at
Stalin.
at Hitler, and people look at somebody else in America, and we know, we look at them, you know, in history, or we look at them currently, and we go, they are foul people, they are evil people. But how, and when you break them down, this is why I say they're small little people, it is their insecurities they're definitely trying to cover up, and they will do it by demolishing everyone else. But how do people follow them? That's what I don't understand. What power do they have to get people to follow them? Because if you truly listen to them, and you hear them, and it's like, I don't understand how they get so many followers.
Right. Well, that's like here. Are you in the US? Or
I'm in Canada.
Oh, in Canada. Okay, I know I hear an accent.
I'm British.
You sound British. Okay. Well, you know what we've endured here with Trump.
Oh, yes, I do.
So, you know, you could add, like, how could people follow him? Well, the way I've understood it is that, and other people like him, Putin, his friend, it's that they kind of give allowance to other people to tap into their own things that are thoughts and feelings that previously they had to sort of suppress. So, for instance, all the racist and anti-Semitic and hateful rhetoric that people have been free to really come out with in the last few years, thanks to a president who said, yeah, like that's where it's at, you know, that's where I'm at. And they were like, yeah, rah, rah. So
I call them shoot stirrers.
Shoot stirrers.
Well, instead of starers. I'm substituting shoot for something else. But they, oh, you're right. So I'll say it. They're shit stirrers. They just know how to wind people up, right?
The Trumps and Putins and
yes, they know how to wind people up, don't they?
Well, yes, but it's also it's more abstract than that, in the sense that here's a figure of authority. I mean, every time I heard somebody refer to Trump as the most powerful man in the world, I mean, I wanted to like dive out the window, you know. It's like, you know, you're calling this racist, hateful man the most powerful,
misogynistic, narcissistic,
totally. And so him being called that, the most powerful man in the world, and being the president, enabled a lot of people who before that, you know, didn't feel free to come out with all their nasty, hateful stuff themselves. But once they had this figure of authority, the most powerful man in the world, if you will, you know, saying, sure, that's how I am, you know, and you can be that way too. They all felt like it's okay. I mean, he didn't, in a way, he almost didn't even have to say, you know, he didn't have to have rallies, you know, because how he felt was known and how he acted. And so the people who would follow him just followed by example, in a way, you know.
And you know, with what's going on with January 6th, you know, there was somebody interviewing people at a rally and saying, well, you know, January 6th is proving that he incited that he told them, you know, take away the gun control thing. It doesn't matter if, you know, somebody's killed. Doesn't that change your mind? No, it's all lies. And the thing is, I think this is where where things get out of proportion, and this is why we can see things like the Holocaust and everything happen, is people get caught up in a hysteria that they wouldn't be able to see the truth in front of them anymore. What is it about us as human beings that we'd rather believe the hysteria of a lie than actually face the fact of that lie and know that we've had the wool pulled over us? Is it because we are embarrassed, or have we got so far down the rabbit hole we don't know how to get back?
You know what? I think it really depends on the individual in this case, because, if you've been following it, some people have sort of woken up, if you want to call it that. Mm-hmm. There are people who follow Trump who have, turned around and said, nope.
Enough is enough.
Exactly. This is where I, draw the line. Exactly. So for some people, it depends on the individual's strengths and what's important to them. And, some of it has to do with embarrassment. And, some people can tolerate being embarrassed more than others. Yeah. And, so it's really, we could hope that as time goes on, more and more people will realize that it's been just a horrendous lie.
Yes. So. And, and even if you got convicted, it's not going to go away soon because, the cat is out of the bag, so to speak. And I think America is in for some form of revolution, that is going to happen. But, this brings me back to your book on the Holocaust. And one of the worrisome things is, our generation, my mother was in the war, my father fought in the Second World War, and actually died at the age of 45, basically, with the post-traumatic stress of being British, you have to suck it up, you're not allowed to deal with it or anything. And, died of a massive heart attack. And he was the last of his squadron. They all died. All those that survived it all died very young. And yet, today you've got these young people coming out like Nazi worshippers, and you've got, the skinheads and then this and that. Do they understand the true horrors of what Second World War and the Holocaust and everything that people went through? There aren't really any graphic enough words to really describe really what people went through.
It. Yeah, I doubt if they know. A lot of them are Holocaust deniers.
Yeah. But because this is not being taught in schools anymore, is it? It's, there's part of a history that seems to have been thrown out.
Is it? I'm not really aware, because I have a son, but he was special needs. And so, he missed out on a lot of that. So I don't really know what they're teaching in schools, but I believe it, and just some stuff I hear about books that they don't want to allow in school.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. There was a movement called, I'm blocking it.
Yeah, but it's kind of like a Christian movement that's taken over, and it kind of a little bit a preview of the Handmaid's Tale, of kind of what's going on there. And it's, this is, I fear that, if we will repeat history. If we don't learn from history, we will repeat it, maybe not exactly the same. But, you've got with the abortion issue, you've got certain states saying, I will pay you to tell on someone.
I know.
And this is what went on, with exactly. If there's a Jew, we'll reward you, right?
It's very similar. There are a lot of similarities.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I was saying to my husband recently, well, we could go to Canada. Literally, because we have it. As soon as Trump took over, we were saying, like, what if we have to go somewhere,
Did you know that the Canadian embassy's site went down the moment Trump got elected? Because of everybody applying to come to Canada.
Really?
Yes.
No, I didn't know that. Oh my God. But then I even went further than that, and I said, well, I can go to Israel because I'm Jewish, and every Jew has automatically a dual, a citizenship in Israel. And I was kidding my husband because he was at one, when we first got together, he was going to convert to Judaism, but he would have had to get circumcised as an adult. So he said, no, I'm not going to convert. But
Not that
so
hard.
I said to him recently, and I said, they won't let you in. You'll regret that you didn't convert. And he said, but we're still married, so they're not going to turn me away as your husband. I said, that's true. But I only mention that to point out that I am thinking like that.
Yes.
That because that's how it happened in Europe.
Yeah.
In the mid to late 30s, when things were starting to look amiss and starting to seem weird, and but a lot of the Jews were like, oh, what are you making a fuss about?
Right.
They're going to go away, and nothing's going to happen. And then before they knew it, they were being like shuttled off to ghettos, and
Yes. And the thing is that history will repeat itself if we do not see the signs and turn the tide. The thing is, the warnings are screaming at people right now. They're screaming at people, and yet people are either la 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 la, or it's literally going over their heads, or the people that are truly hearing it are trying to speak to everyone else. Do you not hear that? Do you not see what's happening? And it's trying to, in a foreign voice, in an arena of cha-cha, nobody's listening, and they feel that the hysteria, the hurricane hysteria, is got so big and so loud that no reasoning can speak out right now, that nobody's hearing it because over the loud noise of the hysteria.
Well, you know what? Again, I wouldn't say nobody is hearing it.
Right. People like us are hearing it, but we're the ones trying to shout reason.
Exactly.
Nobody wants to hear the reason.
It has to start with somebody.
Yeah.
So, but I'm also an astrologer. And so
it's a good astrology ahead of us.
Well, I guess I see like how we're living now. It's such an extreme of so many things happening at once.
Yes.
That I have to assume that at some point it's going to shift. The
pendulum switch, right?
Always goes back and forth.
Yeah.
So now it's like this to the right, my right is this way, and it's going to come creeping back. But I think that the most we can hope for is that as little damage. Obviously in a place in Ukraine, they've had, they're like scapegoats in a way.
Yeah.
They're sort of universal scapegoats, if you want to call it, like there's a focus there. And they're bearing a really bad brunt of this negative kind of energy that's out there. But all around the world, the pandemic has thrown in, it's like share of bad energy.
Yeah.
But I guess just as individuals, we have to do what we can each do and try to affect other people for the good, and hope that other people hear before there's just too much. That's.
But we've got to pay attention, though, don't we? We do have to pay attention. Please don't be an ostrich and bury your head in the sand. This isn't going to go away on its own. It really is the forces need to come together, in good energy in order to raise that vibration.
It's sort of a paradox, because I know even like when I'll turn on the TV and I'll watch like Rachel Maddow or, MSNBC and all those people on there. And at a certain point, very often I'll say, I can't watch this anymore. It's just too disturbing.
No, I have to watch Trevor Noah, who's a comedian, because that's the only way that you can actually get the news. Colbert, they will deliver it and then kind of crack a joke to kind of because otherwise it's just too unbelievable.
Right.
Yeah.
But then, I might like turn the channel off and I'll say to myself, well, at least I have to know what's going on.
Yes.
And I do. I read online. I read books. I listen to stuff. So I know what's going on. I just won't allow it to, I won't take it in at such an extent that it makes me feel sick.
You won't absorb it.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
The universe about 4.5 years ago gave me a saying, and the universe is going to shake us up, to wake us up, for us to step up, to change it up and grow up. And the grow up is a double entendre. It's the grow up as human beings and stop acting like spoiled brats, but also grow up with our vibration and our positive energy. And I think, many of the parts of the world are still being very much shaking up. But then you look at the Ukraine leader who stepped up. Right? He has stepped up and he's trying to change that tide instead of just giving in and laying down. And it's like, it's like the David and the Goliath, right? And so the thing is the more we support him, the more we're actually supporting the Davids of the world, and rather than giving in to the Goliaths.
Right, exactly.
So your book, writing about the Holocaust, it's again, a lot of generations just think, as you said, it was a hoax. So it was too long ago. It's never going to happen again. And, then a series like Handmaid's Tale comes out, which we think is fiction. And then we start seeing far too much reality comparing with it. Is that I do feel that in some form or other, we could see this again. Maybe not exactly the same way, but if we don't pay attention to the message, and if we don't understand the scarring that even being a survivor does. My mother was in England. She had a daughter, my sister. I remember her telling me that she was going off to the school to pick up some kids. And as the kids are coming out, a bomb hit. And she had to throw herself over. She put kids under the pram and she threw herself over the baby. And, just seeing all of that. And then my father was a squadron leader and, and supported the bombers and got spies out at night and all of that. And they wouldn't talk much about it, but you saw the signs of it in always making sure there's enough food in the cupboard, always being wary of strangers, certain noises and trust factor, and a lot of things stayed with them that stayed as scars.
Absolutely. Well, I don't know about you, but when I go to sleep at night, I dream about stuff that happened to me when I was 25 or, so imagine they have that in their head and they can go to sleep. I don't know how some of them are able to sleep because they must dream about it, so even if you don't want to think about it or revisit it, unless you go through some kind of program, like in my book, or some sort of therapy that, I don't know, hypnotizes it out of your brain.
Right.
It's locked in there.
Yes.
And even if you lead a very positive, forward-looking life, it's still in there.
Yeah, the triggers. I had a veteran. I have a veteran, global veterans genre as well, and interview a lot of veterans. And I had one the other day, and he's now actually breeding dogs for post-traumatic stress and abuse people because his wife was severely abused to the point of metal in her body. I mean, just unbelievable, and was protected. The husband was protected by the military, so he never actually served term. He's still out there, but they're breeding dogs for abusive and post-traumatic stress. And there's one thing that he said he used to sleep with a gun under his pillow, and he said he'll wake up in the night in a sweat and want to be shooting the shadows coming out of the wall. But when he got the dog calmed him down quite completely, and he's not done that again, because animals are just such wonderful little conduits, and they know how to calm you down and etc. And but every veteran I've talked about, they've all got some form of post-traumatic stress.
Oh, of course.
But that the support isn't enough out there, so many of them have created their own support circles and their own support programs because they understand what's needed.
And my husband is a Vietnam veteran, and he's talked about, some of the stuff that he's gone through. And I mean, I don't know if he still dreams about it, but I know that until recently, he certainly has. So, it's really up to all of us to help ourselves, but also help the people around us to the extent that we can. Otherwise, it's just going to stop. The positive energy flow won't go anywhere.
Right.
We have to actively do something with it.
Yes, most certainly. I think, again, I've interviewed people with some of the most horrific stories, and you think, how can a human being do that, especially like to a child? And then, you look at this beautiful human being and who they are today, and they said, they had to go through a process. They had to go through something to heal, to let go, and the things they haven't forgotten. And they can talk about every detail. What they don't have, though, is the pain associated with it anymore. Right.
But you know what? As you were saying that, I was also thinking about what about the abusers? They need to also go through some sort of process whereby they heal, because in order for people to be so cruel and evil to other people and inflict such pain and suffering on other people, there has to be something going on within them.
Repeat programming, right? It doesn't matter how intellectual the head said, I will never do it. The program is in there, and unless there's another program that's going to override it, they're going to repeat it. Right?
In fact, in my book, I'm pointing, here it is, I have a character who, Sam, his name is a anti-Semite and a right-winger, and he winds up going through the program that I created in the book. So I don't want to give anything away, but
no. I mean, we want to hear more about the book, so people will definitely read it and understand what it's all about. So yes, please tell as much as you can.
Besides having characters who were more typical kind of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and going from the 60s to the 70s and doing certain things of the me generation of the 70s.
That was my generation.
The 70s.
Yes.
Okay. Well, the 70s really followed the 60s. The 60s was sort of big social explosion.
Yes.
But by the time the 70s came around, it was people going within. And also, I think there was some damage that happened from the 60s. Despite all the great stuff that happened, there was also, there was some overindulgence.
Yes.
In various ways. And
pendulum swinging too far to the one side, right? Instead of a balance. Yeah.
Exactly. So then by the 70s, it started swinging back the other way. And, all these self-help books and self-help groups and movements and everything, people were looking within. So I try to have a sort of balance in it with including people who were not, of the typical group, but were from elsewhere. And, but everybody sort of winds up like going through the same stuff in a way, and winds up making their peace in different ways with each other. Like the main relationship in the book is through the two women, one of whom is, based on me. She's in her early 20s, and she's just sort of recovered from the 60s, but still has certain issues going on. She sort of needs a direction to go in. She doesn't really know exactly what direction. And then there's this other woman, Ida, who is a Holocaust survivor in her 40s. And the two, sort of meet accidentally and take to each other, and they become friends. And they have these sort of parallel experiences, so they're like approaching the same thing, but from different directions, And a lot of stuff happens that, I had a lot of fun writing it. It was challenging, but fun ultimately. And some, people that I've spoken to have really enjoyed reading it. I hope that more people will look into it. And I also hope that, I think it would make a great film, so if anybody's watching or listening that, has any sort of resource with the film industry, hint, hint, 30 years hence, it really, because it has some extremes in it.
Yes.
And for film, you need extremes, you need visuals.
But extremes, but then familiarities.
Exactly. Like the personal, but the larger than personal.
Yeah.
And, the societal, and there is that. So I think it would really, really do well as a film.
And I think it kind of, looking at somebody who's been through the Holocaust, and there's somebody else who's going through their own stuff, different era, different battles, right? But it's not the comparison of the battles per se. It's an understanding, quite honestly, of the scars the battles have left, and how to get through them. And we have gone through a battle. We're going through a battle now as humanity. We're going through this change right now. The universe is begging us to grow up, to kind of invest in ourselves. Everybody's been promoted pretty well from the 80s to live an outside life, right? The car, the house, the clothes, and of course with social media, the likes will define your success and make you happy. And the mantra now is your happiness lies within you, and it's only in the journey in that is going to allow you to project out the love that comes from within, that you will find the happiness that you seek out. But we've still got the people holding on to the exterior and not willing to do the journey on the interior.
Right. Because it's not that easy.
No. It's worth it, but it's not easy. Yes.
Right. But it takes effort and patience and the willingness to see stuff within yourself that maybe you don't like that much, or that's painful. It's much easier to brush it over and, look outside at material things and play and, watch films and, go to events and rides and, whatever people do to distract themselves,
I think if we had we have a lot of war movies, we have a lot of, fighting type movies, but if they did alongside, do you remember the movie Coming Home? Jane Fonda and John Voight?
I sure do. I saw it several times.
Right. And, and then we had that beautiful movie, The Beautiful Life, of the guy that was in the internment camp, which was, the keeping everybody up and positive no matter what they were up against. But I think if we, we have a story where, the pain is being acknowledged, the fighting is being acknowledged, but there must be some way out of this, showing people the process and the willingness to take the journey away from the pain, away from the anger, away from the gun is going to resolve it all.
Absolutely. Totally. I mean, when people watch a film, I think a lot of people, certain movies, I don't understand. Like I never watch horror movies. A lot of people really love them. And I guess that's like pure escapism.
Yeah.
Personally, I've always been somebody who wants to learn something or wants to, relate to something personally.
Yeah.
If I watch a film or read a book, usually.
Right. Well, if it's horror for horror's sake, slashing and dashing and all of that type of thing, but when you've got something where it is the facing of the evil and people coming together to fight that together, then it becomes that inspiration, like the show Stranger Things, kind of almost broke Netflix in its 4th season because it's a bunch of kids against evil and how they came together to support one another against the Stranger Things. Things, and it's a megalomaniac making a woman with a young child with certain gifts and trying to manipulate her into a weapon and all going wrong. From the first episode, these kids are amazing actors, and from that first episode is kind of the upside down world that she opens a gate to and lets out accidentally. But you know, the story is, yes, they're facing evil, but it's how they came together. And these are a bunch of teens facing their own awkwardness in life, you know, struggling through with parents divorcing or this or that or whatever. And yet they came together. And I think that's the reason why it's been such a success. It's not so much the horror. It is showing how you can face anything when you come together.
I'll have to check that out.
Might be a bit too horror for you in some areas, but
it might be.
You know, yeah, but it, you know, that is the principle kind of behind it. And I think because a lot of people do like the horror, as you said, escapism, but having that message in there as well.
Right.
Right.
Well, that's really ideal, I guess.
Yes.
You know,
and the thing is, you know, many people just don't want to make a choice, and actually not making a choice is already a choice.
Exactly.
Right. And it's like somewhere along the line, you've got to stop pointing your finger at everybody out there and realize there's three pointing back at you and saying, what are you going to do about it? We have to take accountability for our own lives. We may not always choose what's happening to us, but then when we choose to make it happening for us, you know, what skills, what abilities, what mindset, what heart set, what soul set do I have on this to make this work for me rather than against me?
Exactly. Right. Well, that's the gist of everything that we've been talking about.
Right.
Really.
Exactly.
You know.
And, you know, we need that encouragement. And, you know, and I think having a story of two women, one going through her own discovery and another woman obviously still having scars from what she's been through. Maybe one sounds like it was kind of self-imposed and the other one was imposed upon her. But going through their own recovery and learning from each other, again, going back to support and realizing we don't have to do this alone.
Exactly.
We don't.
Yes. And in the book, I mean, there are other characters too who play a part and are part of their journeys, you know, so I like to think that makes it more interesting.
Yes.
You know, and some of the other characters are, you know, I think they're interesting.
I think when we read a book and we see a bit of ourselves in there, or we relate to something, either a character or a storyline, and you put that book down and it leaves you thinking, lets you digest, and maybe it kind of has you step outside of yourself and look at it. You know, this is the way you've been thinking, or this is the way you've been feeling. What are you going to do about it?
Exactly.
You know, and that is, you know, a lot of people, I don't know if you're on audio yet, a lot of people have gone to audiobooks, but whether you listen or you read, please get into books, because sometimes they're just a lovely escapism, but many a time there's a reflection of you in there that book is trying to show you something.
Exactly. Right. And that's a good idea. It's not an audio, it's an ebook. But I haven't made it into audio yet, but I really need to consider that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
And, you know, I always encourage people to read, and I have book clubs. And, you know, as I say, I have podcast clubs as well, because you're reading it and you're getting this out of it. But when you come together with other people and you hear what they've got out of it, suddenly it's like a puzzle that you put together and you see a bigger picture.
Exactly.
So much to be learned from it. You know, don't just read and put it down onto the next. Read, talk about it, digest it, share it.
Well, I would love for my book to be discussed in a book club.
Yes.
In fact, I met somebody online who lives out west in Idaho, and he's part of a book club, and he was talking about my book, and I said, you know, bring it to the book club.
Yes.
So I don't know if he's going to or not, but.
Well, I'm suggesting, folks, book club, get the book. And, you know, it's, you know, we've forgotten all about the Holocaust. You know, we may see movies and things like this, but that doesn't share the pain and the anguish. And even though the 60s was kind of women's lib and people kind of experimenting, there was still a price to pay for that, right? Because as you said, went too far one way before kind of going back the other way. And, you know, it was also the time of anti-war the time of experimenting with drugs, great music time, because music became our poetry, right? It became our voice. But it was a time of confusion, of stepping out of a restraint. And in doing so, kind of sometimes it's like an elastic band, you find yourself released from the elastic band, but propelled too far forward.
But you know what? That actually had its seeds in the 50s.
Mm-hmm.
The beatniks.
Yes.
That's where it really started.
Yes. Yeah.
Have you read like beatnik literature?
No, I haven't.
I went through a phase of reading like everything from that was by the authors and poets and writers of the 50s and about them. And I just found it fascinating. And it really did lead to the 60s. It was, they were like the rebels of the 40s and the 50s.
Yes.
They were sort of like on the fringes when the 50s had that, Ike Eisenhower and, the little suburbs and the little ticky-tacky boxes.
Yes,
houses.
And they all look just the same. Yes.
Right, exactly. And
Frederick and Nina
were, they were starting to get into drugs themselves.
Yes.
And they were creative. It was all about creativity.
Yeah.
And they were writing poetry and, holding hootenannies and folk songs.
Well, I mean, the new Elvis movie out there right now, you're kind of looking at Elvis and it's like, artists like him, again, going back to the artists, they're the ones that kind of pushed the limit and kind of broke down some barriers and made people kind of shake out of that restraint. And, once they got the taste of the honey, they wanted the whole pot.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
And again, it's the balance. Too much honey is bad for you. So,
Exactly.
So then it was the equilibrium, and then coming back again, the principle behind it is good, but how do we actually put it into a balance that does have a good balance, a good equilibrium? So, and I was a 70s chick, as I said. That's when I was in my late teens and in discovery, and I lived in South Africa at that time as well.
Wow. Okay.
So a slightly different experience. We didn't have TV, so we would go to movies, we go to plays, and
that's how you sound. You sound
South African? Yes, a little bit.
Yes.
After 43 years, it's still there. 42 years,
wow.
Yeah.
But when you think of another really interesting thing that I'm going to think about more after talking with you is, in astrology, everything, of course, is related. So, you have the 12 signs.
Yes.
And each sign has its own meaning, but each sign leads to the next sign. I mean, most people who don't know about astrology don't know that. But, and I'm thinking like it's almost like a parallel with decades and what happens socially and politically. And you can look at a decade and how it leads to the next decade.
Yes.
It's like each new thing takes on something from what preceded it and then builds on it and then leads to something else. So
yes, I'm always saying be careful what you seed, and because it will grow. You don't want weeds, but also when you seed a good idea, make sure you nurture it and water it well.
Yes, that's true.
But allow it to grow. Don't tug at the roots. It will grow in its own time as long as you look after it.
Yes, very
well put. Each decade is seeding for the next, isn't it? And we're in still in the early 20s here, and I'm hoping that in the next 8 years we're going to find that equilibrium. We're going to find that balance. There are so many spiritual souls awakening, conscious people awakening. I do a lot of business shows, and it's wonderful to hear how this consciousness is stepping into business, where it's not profit at the expense of people and planet. It's people and planet for profit. Invest in the people, invest in the planet, and the way you treat people is the reward that you're going to get. And that dynamic is changing wonderfully around the world. Our environment, people are becoming more conscious of. Look at veganism and how that has changed quite considerably. It used to be you were just a hippie granola bar, and now it's become a mainstream. So
right.
as you said, even the 70s was seeding that, and it's slowly growing and
Exactly.
growing. Yeah.
And it grows and grows. Exactly. So I haven't really thought of it beyond like the 80s, but I'm going to sit down later and think about it from the 80s to the 90s, the 90s to
Mm-hmm.
the tens or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, well, the
0
last
to
4
10.
decades. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I have a daughter turning 40 this year, and it's just like, we
Oh
talk
my
about the
goodness.
80s and it didn't feel that
Yeah.
long ago. And then all of a sudden I realize it's 4 decades,
Yeah. Isn't
Yeah.
that amazing? The
Yes.
way you notice how time like
Mm,
goes faster each year. It seems to go faster and
yeah.
faster.
And I think this is a good, thing to actually understand. It doesn't matter who you are, where you are, what you are. We're all under the same time. Time is the one consistent thing. What we
Mm-hmm.
do with that time. And
Mm-hmm.
the thing is, don't waste it in hateful rhetoric, in discord, in greed, or in ego or insecurity. Don't waste it, because somewhere along the line you're going to have to pay the piper, and the piper is your consciousness
Mm-hmm.
of, have you done wrong? Have you, what are you going to have to undo to get
Mm-hmm.
onto that path? Because as I said, we see an awful lot of Christian rhetoric right now, spouting. And I actually did have somebody on once when I made a statement that God is love, and that you can't knowingly hurt anyone else, because that would be to go against God, and he disagreed. And I thought, okay, I don't know that kind of religion. The one I do know is meant to be that this is meant to be a loving, forgiving, nurturing presence amongst us. And if it becomes something that becomes dictatorial, a doctrine that is demanding and that is condemning, then this is a man-made religion. This is not the higher energy religion, right? And it's up to
Wow.
us to pay attention.
Absolutely. I'm sure he must have had some kind of weird explanation for that.
Yes, we didn't go too deep into it because he fervently disagreed. So I went, okay, we're on two totally
Moving
separate
right
causes
along.
on here. Yes, but sometimes I do get surprised sometimes, but because a face is represented this way, but what's behind it is something different, right? And that's what
Right.
always makes it interesting. But
Right.
with the stepping into the understanding of Buddhism, the philosophy about that is respect of all living things. That's the fundamental, isn't it?
Yes, it absolutely is. Yes.
And if we step
Yes.
into that, having some respect for all living things,
Mm-hmm.
and value all living things,
Mm-hmm.
be conscious of all living things and what you do to it and what your part is to play. And we followed that philosophy, even just as a philosophy, I think it will put us on the right path.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally. Maybe you should write a book.
I am in the midst of it. I'm taking this summer off to do it, actually.
Oh, really? What kind of book?
Kind of a memoir. It's kind of a journey to where I am now, and which I'm finding very difficult to write because it's memoir. So, and I'm more of an article writer, which I'm going to be writing it more in that fashion. But, I'm one of these people, I've done the work to get where I am. So if I'm revisiting the past, I'm not going to be revisiting it from a painful perspective, from an observation perspective. I don't want to go back there, but I can, I can paint where I came from and why I got here today, but that's,
Okay, now, but as a writer and somebody who has studied writing intensely for many years, what makes a book come alive is, what you put in it, the real blood and guts stuff. If you leave that out and just...
Oh, no, it will be in. I just don't want to attach pain to it.
Okay.
It's like I will talk about the things that have happened because they've made me who I am today. But, but I don't...
Remember you've probably heard the old saying, show, don't tell, when you write. The more you actually show something rather than, like if you say, I got caught in a storm, is not quite as effective as saying, suddenly there was thunder and I got scared and
Yeah,
I jumped and,
yeah. Now there'll be that in that, but it's yeah, it is challenging. It is challenging. That's why I've put it off for so long. But I've been nagged by people to have it, and so I am taking the summer off.
Great, that's great.
From shows, and I'm hoping to at least get most of it done and get into at least the swing of it. So
very good.
But yeah, my brother's the author. He's a professional author. So,
Okay.
But with me, as I said, more of a blogger and article writer. So I'll have to go with what comes. I'm a knowingness person. I'm just going to let it come out of me, and then take everything afterwards and put it together. So let it be that way, right? Instead of trying to go against something that isn't me, go with something that is me.
Right.
Yeah.
Or as they used to say in the program Est in the 70s, ride the horse in the direction it's going.
Yes. Don't turn around, hold on to the tail and say, I want to go that way. Yeah.
But you know what? In one of the Buddhist classes that I tuned into a couple of months ago, they said the exact opposite. They said, if you're on a horse and it wants to go that way, you don't have to go that way. You can make it go the other way. Well, then
just get off the horse then if you don't want to get that way, but don't try and make the horse go that way.
Exactly.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah. I have another saying is that you can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
But if you leave it there long enough, it's going to realize it's thirsty.
Right, if the water doesn't evaporate.
Right, true. For some people, they'll wait for the water to be gone and then complain. But,
right.
Dying of thirst, and the water was there all the time.
Right,
but for those that realize they are thirsty and they want to drink from that well, we're here for them, right?
Exactly, right.
But yeah, human beings, I think doesn't matter how much we study us, we are extraordinary creatures in what we're capable of, but we're also extraordinary creatures in how little we think of ourselves.
True. Yes. In some cases, yeah.
Yeah. So I think if we could place a better value on ourselves, not ego, right? But place the value and nurture yourself to become the best you can be, you bring that essence to everything else that you do.
Yes.
But that responsibility, that accountability, doesn't matter what else has happened to you or around you, that responsibility is on you. No getting away from it, right? Nobody else can take your journey for you.
That's right.
So how do people get hold of the book, my love?
Well, Amazon, of course, Barnes and Noble, any place that they can get books online, or I think in stores too. If you go into any bookstore, you can just order it by name.
30 Years Hence by Denise Beck-Clark. And and what is your website, love?
I was just going to say that. It's my name again.
Right.
It's DeniseBeck-Clark.com.
And the Beck-Clark. Right. The Beck-Clark is BECK-CLARK.com, folks. So Denise Beck-Clark.com. And of course, you're on Facebook, Denise Beck-Clark without the hyphen. You're on Instagram. Slightly different there. That's BenB19.
Yes.
And your Twitter handle is?
I think it's also DenB19. I think. I'm not sure.
I'll look it up here for you. Unfortunately, yes, it is. It's DenB419. So that is what it is there on that. And, it's, if you want to learn about not only your own self-discovery, because as I said, it's always, there's always something to be discovered about yourself in a book, always. And, reading these two different stories that really have a succinctness about them, that are very, very revealing, I think is something that's going to be very revealing to the reader. And I encourage people to pick up the book, read it, set up a book club, have a discussion, because that's how you get the most out of it, is having a discussion who's read the book afterwards. This is what I got out of it. What did you get out of it? And then it opens up all these different perspectives, and we learn so much about
Mhm.
ourselves and about society and about, the book. It's something I just wish people would do more of.
I think I need to look into book clubs and maybe send around some copies.
Yes,
You know,
yes.
that's a good idea.
Or even, setting up a book club group on Facebook. Read the book and leave the comments and let's have a conversation. You can even have a
On your
face.
website? Right,
No,
you
no,
mean
you can do
on
it. You can
Facebook?
set up a Facebook group and you can have it
Oh,
that
oh, right.
that people read the book, they leave the comments, and then you can have a live Facebook with people that can come into the room and have a conversation about it.
Oh,
Keep the
cool. Okay.
conversation going because, this is something that I don't want. We look at the future and we feel a little bit doom and gloom, right?
Mhm.
Because of where we're at right now. But
Mhm.
we have the paintbrush in our hands. And that canvas is still a blank canvas. So what you want to see, you need to paint. But the more you know about yesterday, the more it empowers you for tomorrow.
Right. The more depth you have.
Yeah. The more
Yeah.
understanding, more compassion,
Mhm.
right? And compassion even for yourself, which is important. So
Absolutely.
thank you for writing the book. Thank you for sharing
Thank
with us here
you.
today.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And folks, remember, book club, read the book. This is the summer. It's a perfect time to go in the hammock or find a nice cozy chair in the garden, a glass of wine, a cup of coffee, put up your feet, lovely breeze and sunlight out there, and read the
Oh,
book.
sounds great.
No, it does sound great, doesn't it? Yeah, I wish I had time for it. Going to have to write one instead of read one. But this
Right.
is a perfect situation. To go and read that book, and maybe just buy it for a few of your girlfriends and say, "Hey, let's read it together. Let's get together and have a discussion on it." You'll be so surprised at what each one of you learned from it, and what you've learned about society and how much we're repeating things at the present moment, and which way we have the power to steer it in a different direction.
Yes.
Thanks so much, Denise. And to everyone
Thank
else out
you.
there, remember, you are the answer to your own life if only you're willing to ask the right question. Until next time, bye for now. We hope that you enjoyed the show. Find all of our shows on selfdiscoverymedia.com under podcasts or self-discovery-media/shows. And for all our current shows, go to What's New. We are supported by you, the audience. You'll see a nice big shiny blue button for one-time donations or follow us on Patreon and you will be able to support us there. We enjoy bringing you such wisdom. And the next show will be up in just a moment.